With our previous video of animation speeds firmly in mind, let's go through a practical exercise here of creating some real-life animation, applying the correct speed and also a style too. I've got a series of images here, but I only really need one to create the slide style and the animation, and then we can apply that to the rest of the images if we wish. Let's begin with this image by opening this up into the Objects and Animation screen. Just before I do, I'll just draw your attention to the fact that it was created at 2560x1440. Remember, that's a 16:9 aspect ratio, but it does give us a bit of scope to animate the image bigger than the slideshow if we wish. However, in this exercise, I doubt we're going to need that. So we could be starting here with images of 1920, 1080. So let me open up the Objects and Animation screen to make a start. I've decided that I want a background for my image, and I'm going to use the actual image itself to create that. I'm going to do that simply by just making it a little bit bigger. I'm going to go to my Animation tab. I'm going to add a degree of blur, and I may even drop down the opacity as well. Now, there's nothing to stop you from animating this background if you wish. Now, one of the things we've been doing up to now is we've been cloning keyframes. If I was to put my cursor anywhere along here and hit Alt Insert, which is the shortcut key for clone, or I can right click here and choose clone. When I do that, if you look at all the boxes here, they're all turned on. Let me just delete that, and what I'm going to do next is just apply one, just add a keyframe via the insert key, or we'll use the add keyframe here. You'll notice there's a difference. None of these are turned on. So if I did want some animation to take place with this particular image, what I've got to do is obviously decide what that's going to be. Let me go to the start, let me move the image to the left and maybe a little bit down or up, and then go to the end keyframe, and I'm going to tick the pan box to bring it all into play, and I can bring it the other way. So I've got a bit of a gentle movement over the entire time I bring the image itself onto the screen. I suppose before I went into this screen I could have done with setting the slide duration, but sometimes we don't always know what we're going to need. But let's think this through. I want the image to float on screen. I think that's going to need about 4 seconds. I want the image on screen at least 4 seconds, and then of course it's going to need another 4 to leave the screen. So at the minimum I'm probably going to need a 12-second slide duration. Not a bad idea if we just slip out of the Objects and Animation screen and we set up that 12 seconds and go back in. The next stage of the animation is that I want to avoid the parent and child relationship. If you watched the previous video where I right clicked and added text to an image, I actually added the text as a child of the parent. So if I had animated the parent, the child would have run the same animation. Here I don't want to do that with my background, because if I did, then the image I bring on screen is going to take on the same animation we've applied here, and we don't want that. We just want that to rumble along nice and gently and slowly in the background, just to give a bit of gentle movement, but not enough to distract us from the image. So, pressing the space bar, if I click into the grey area, I can add an image, and of course the image I want is the same one. So I just need to navigate to where I'm working. There's the image. I want the image to be slightly smaller than the screen itself, so we can add a little bit of edging and maybe even a drop shadow, although with a dark image we may not see a drop shadow that well, with others we may. So we can choose how much we're going to bring the image down. Generally speaking, a good average is 85, but we can all choose something different. So we've got the first keyframe, we've got it set up exactly where it's appearing on screen by default, but we've set the zoom to 85. What I'm going to do is to clone 4 keyframes. I'm going to hold the Alt key, hit Insert, need to click somewhere first, Insert, Insert, Insert. I've now got the 4 keyframes. I'm going to space these out before I start. There's my final keyframe. We know that's going to locate at 12 seconds because we chose 12 seconds as a slide duration. But I said we could do with probably at least 4 seconds for the image to appear on screen. So that keyframe, we need that to be located at the 4-second point, so we can put 4000 in there. I wanted at least 4 seconds to view the image. We may decide to increase that. That's another personal choice, but here we can put in 8 seconds. So we've got a nice spaced out set of keyframes. All we need to do now is to apply the animation we want. Now, in actual fact, before we begin the animation, let's add a little bit of style to this. I'm going to go to my Properties tab. I'm going to tick the border option. I need this to be a lot less than you see there, but once again, the thickness of the frame we use is all going to be personal, but 0.5 generally works for me. And I'm just going to put a default shadow on this. As I said earlier on, I think we're unlikely to see very much there, but let's go back to the Animation tab, back to our first keyframe. Where do we want the image to come from? Well, we could have it coming from the top left and drifting out bottom right, or vice versa. Again, personal choice. I'm going to click and drag to the left. I'm going to rotate it a little bit. I'm going to drag it down. Need a little bit more coming off of there, and a little bit more just to get it coming off in that area. So the first part of my animation is the image floating on screen over 4 seconds. Between here and here, I want the image to do absolutely nothing. Just want it to sit there and look lovely, so we can look at the image before we decide what happens between this keyframe and the end. And if we brought it on from the bottom left, well, let's take it off at the top right. I'll bring it to the right. I'll give it a bit of rotation. I will bring it up. That means I need a bit more pan, and you can see what we have. So let's have a quick look at this, but remember we've got no speed attached. There's the image coming on screen. It's going to look much nicer than that when you produce this in your version of Pictures to Exe. And there you can see that very strong jolt as the image leaves the screen. So let's set up the speed. Going back to the first keyframe, we need speed between here and here. We need nothing between there and there, but then we need speed again for the last part of the animation, because each of these keyframes separates our animation into 3 sections, albeit the center section doesn't do anything at all. And of course, if we're going to add a speed option here, we've got to remember exactly what we've done, because from there to there we've applied a rotation, we've applied a pan, we haven't changed the zoom, so we're okay there. So we've got to add speed for the pan and also the rotate. Now I'm going to go to my pan, add modifier, animation speed, and here I want to slow down. Because the image is coming onto the screen, I don't mind the image coming on a little bit faster, which it will do. If we slow it down at the end, then it has to start a small amount faster. But I want it to come to a rest nice and gently, and the rotation as well will do exactly the same there. Slow down. But that means when we go to this keyframe, which is going to control the next movement off, then what we need to do there is perhaps use that accelerate option. So we'll do that. And in the rotate, and there we have our animation created. Now it drops into a very gentle position in the center of the frame to allow us to evaluate it. and then as you can see it takes off in a gentle way but speeds up gradually as it leaves the frame. Before we go any further, we really ought to have a full screen preview of this. Now that's difficult for me to do and record a tutorial. So we're just going to do this here. I think I'll swap these around a little bit. Let me push this image here just so I can start the image or start the animation, and we can look at now the animation we've created with the fade on and off in place. So starting with the car, I can press play, and as you can see we get that lovely fade. The background is moving okay, but we need to make an evaluation here. Is the image on screen long enough, the center image that is? If not, then you've got the opportunity to increase this. So if I wanted to make that 14 and go back to my objects and animation screen, you'll notice that none of the keyframes have been changed apart from the one that was anchored on the right. That one, when it's anchored at that point, will always move a little bit, but it's this one we need to change because I've just added a couple of seconds onto that. So my 8,000 needs to become 10,000. So I've now got my image on screen longer in the middle. The reason I've said that or raised this about getting these decisions correct is because when we make our slide style, the slide style does include the slide duration. We can change it a little bit afterwards, but if we've carefully planned the animation to look good, then we don't want to change it very much. So now I can go to my slide style button. I'm just going to go to tools and create a style, and because this is a tutorial I'm going to put it in my category I've called test, and we'll just call this one in and out. Pretty simple description, and I can click to create it. So now I'm going to apply this to the other images. So I'm going to select the first one and shift click to the last one. So every one of those images has been selected. Here we've got 6, but it could be 60. Go to the slide style, go to our test, and just double click our in and out, and you see that little jiggle there shows you it's all done. Let me just put my cursor in this position and we can press play. I've added a little bit of music on this. It's not very loud. Let's watch what we have. And I'll stop it at that position. You can see that when we string the slide styles together, as the image leaves the screen, the next one starts to come on, and it all seems to sit together quite well. Now, once we've got one slide style made, we can easily make adjustments to it. So we can make derivatives, because we may not want to apply exactly the same slide style to 50 or 60 images. We may want broadly the same style, but with some variation for obvious reasons. Well, I can go back into any one of these, and whether I've created it myself or whether I've imported it from somebody else, I can go back to the objects and animation screen and select my image in the first keyframe. And if I'm happy with the timings I've given, which I guess I would be if I'm coming in to make a derivative, I can go to my animation and I can just make some changes. So I could, the most simple I suppose, is just to move that up and move it around and do the same at the end. So now we're going out of the bottom. Let's bring that down there and spin it round the other way, down a bit further, and there. Probably going to get a little bit of music playing here, so I won't speak, I'll just press play. If we come out of the objects and animation screen and I select this and go to my slide styles and go to my create a style, I could call this 2 or 3 or 4 or give it a more descriptive name. Let's create that. So let's select this image here of the pelicans. I had to think then what they were. Let's go back to the slide style and apply in and out too. So there we have from this one. Let me go to my timeline here and just right click and just mute my track for a moment. If we start pressing or press play from this point, there's our image coming up from the bottom, leaving the screen top right. Next one, because we've changed the style, and of course it would be very easy, wouldn't it, to have them coming in a uniform fashion from left, right, top, bottom. You can see the variations you can make and save. So we can import and export styles, but we can also import and export categories of styles. Now in our slide styles here, I've just made a slight adjustment. If we right click any of the categories we make, we can rename that category. So I've just taken my test category and renamed it to in and out slide styles, and you can see the two that we've made. So if I right click here, I can choose to export, and now I can locate where I want to drop those. Now I'm working on a different computer to the one I'm going to put together the files for your download. So I'm going to drop them, as you see I already have, drop them onto a stick, but they can easily be attached to an email, because I'm not sure if I've got the size here. Yes, I have. They're not very large at all. I can click save. Here it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite. Now I've successfully exported the whole category, in our case only 2, but it could have 22 in there. The importing of slide styles is a reverse of what we've done. Pretty simple, but in the interests of being complete, let's just follow that through. And remember, any slide styles you import will take on the name and the category that the user gave it, but you do have the freedom to make changes to both of those. So if I go back to my slide style and to my tools, I can choose import style. Here we're importing a category which contains 2 styles, but as soon as I double click that, we're going to get a familiar warning, because of course it picks up that they're already there. But in your case they won't, so you would just click OK and you would be done.